The final paycheck came from a cannery in Astoria, Oregon, where I had never worked, and the letter said it had been waiting for me since 1998. My name was printed correctly, Evan Mercer. So was my old address in Spokane, the apartment I shared with my wife before we bought our first house. The check was for 3 weeks of wages minus taxes from a company called North Coast Packing. I was 68 then, retired from commercial diving. I had spent most of my working life underwater beneath bridges, docks, dams, and ships, doing repairs people rarely saw unless something failed. I had never packed salmon. I called the number on the letter. A woman in payroll said the company was closing an old account and returning unclaimed wages. Their records showed I worked temporary maintenance in October of 1998. I was in Washington. I said, "The time card was signed." "By who?" "Your supervisor was listed as Martin Shaw." That name reached across nearly 30 years and tightened around my chest. Martin had been my diving partner. He was also the man I blamed for ending my career. The payroll woman said there was one personal item attached to the file, something left in a locker after the temporary crew departed, a red metal thermos. I knew that thermos. Martin carried it everywhere. Coffee in winter, sweet tea in summer. The lid was dented where he had once dropped it from a barge onto steel decking. I asked why his thermos was connected to wages paid under my name. The woman hesitated. "Mr. Mercer, the file says you were the one who left it behind." Martin and I met in 1982 at a dive school near Seattle. He was 26, broad to the chest, and fearless in the careless way men often mistake for talent. I was 29 and already married. I checked every valve twice. Martin laughed at me until the day his backup air hose kinked beneath a piling, and my caution brought him up breathing. After that, we became a team. Commercial divers trust each other in ways that do not always survive dry land. One man goes down. The other tends a line, watches pressure, listens to breathing over the intercom, and decides whether silence means concentration or trouble. Martin was the better welder. I was better at reading currents. We worked together for 16 years. Our wives became friends. Mine was named Linda. Martin's was Gail. The four of us ate dinner together after jobs, argued about baseball, and took one long camping trip that everybody remembered differently. The red thermos was always there. Martin drank from it between dives, leaving the lid loose and coffee rings on whatever paperwork sat beneath it. Once, after a 12-hour shift under a bridge in freezing rain, he handed it to me and said, "You saved my life again. You're buying your own coffee." That was his way of saying thank you. The friendship ended in November of 1998. We were working on a grain terminal near Longview, replacing damaged braces below the waterline. The job had been rushed because a cargo schedule was behind. Martin went down first. 40 minutes later, he surfaced with blood inside his mask. A steel plate had shifted. His left hand was crushed. The company investigation blamed a cutting sequence I had approved. Martin told them I had insisted on it. I denied that. He never spoke to me again. The injury ended his diving career. The accusation nearly ended mine. Now a Cannery payroll office was telling me someone had been working under my name the month before that accident, and Martin's thermos had been left there with him. North Coast Packing had become a seafood warehouse, but the old office manager still lived outside Astoria. Her name was Ruth Delgado. She agreed to meet because, as she put it, anybody still asking about old-time cards probably deserves one honest hour. Ruth was in her 80s and lived in a small house overlooking fields that went gray in the rain. The red thermos sat on her kitchen table before I arrived. Its paint had chipped to bare metal near the handle. The dent in the lid was exactly where I remembered it. I did not touch it. Ruth poured coffee into 2 clean cups. "You worked here under my name?" I asked. "No." "Martin? He used your name." "Why?" "He said you gave permission." "He lied." Ruth nodded without defending him. She remembered Martin because temporary labor usually arrived in groups, but he came alone. He worked nights repairing steam lines and freezer equipment. He knew enough welding to be useful and enough diving language to make everyone believe he had done rougher work. "He looked exhausted," she said. "Slept in his truck some nights." "Why would he need cannery wages?" We were working steady. Ruth looked at the thermos. He was not keeping the money. Then who was... She told me the checks had been signed over to a woman named Gail Shaw, Martin's wife. That should not have surprised me. Married people share money. But Martin and Gail had separated the following spring, and Martin always claimed she left because she could not live with his injury and anger. Ruth said Gail came to the cannery twice to collect the wages in person. The second time, Ruth said, she had a split lip. I felt something in me shift. Martin hit her? No, she said her brother did. Gail had a younger brother named Dennis, a fisherman with bad debts and worse judgment. I had met him twice. He borrowed tools and returned excuses. Ruth said Martin was working secretly to pay something Dennis owed. When I asked why he used my name, she said, because the people looking for Dennis already knew his. Gail was living in Boise. I had not spoken to her since Martin's injury. Linda stayed in touch for a while. Then even that faded. After Linda died, I stopped knowing anything about the people who had once filled our kitchen. Gail answered my call with caution. Evan, you knew it was me? Ruth called. That irritated me. I would have preferred to tell you myself. You are nearly 30 years late. She said it quietly. I deserved it. We met in a hotel cafe halfway between Boise and Spokane. Gail was 71, with silver hair cut short and the same steady gaze she had when she used to correct Martin's fishing stories. I set the thermos between us. Her hand tightened around her coffee cup. I thought that was gone. Why did Martin work under my name? Gail looked toward the window. Because Dennis had taken money from the wrong people. What people? Not gangsters, if that is what you are imagining. Men from the fishing cooperative. Friends. Cousins. People who trusted him. Dennis had collected advance payments for fuel and equipment he never purchased. He used the money to keep his boat from being repossessed, then lost the boat anyway. The cooperative threatened to report him for fraud. Gail begged Martin to help. He did not have enough cash, she said, so he picked up the cannery work. Under my identity, he said your certification records would make hiring easier. You let him? Yes. No excuse. No attempt to make the lie prettier. Why not ask me? Gail gave me a tired smile. Because you would have said no. I started to object. She continued, and you would have been right. That stopped me. Martin used my name because the cannery required proof of industrial safety training. My credentials opened the door. His labor paid Dennis's debt in installments. What did Dennis do after that? He promised to repay Martin. Did he? No. The first version of the story made Martin a dishonest man, protecting a selfish brother-in-law. Then Gail said, that was not why he blamed you for the diving accident. Gail said the cannery work left Martin exhausted. He worked nights in Astoria, then returned to our regular jobs after little or no sleep. He hid it from me by claiming family problems and driving separately. The week before the accident, I noticed his hands shaking while he threaded a regulator. You drinking? I asked. He laughed it off. I remembered that now. I remembered his eyes looking bruised beneath the mask. On the morning of the accident, Martin had been awake nearly 30 hours. The company wanted us to cut a damaged brace in 2 sections. Standard sequence was lower cut first, then upper, so the plate settled away from the diver. Martin suggested upper cut first to save rigging time. I told him it was risky. He said the plate was already supported. We argued. Then the supervisor came over the radio asking why we were behind. I said, fine, do it your way. That was not formal approval. It was still permission. The plate shifted after the uppercut. Martin's hand was between steel and concrete. You told the investigators I chose the sequence alone. I said, yes. Gail replied. He lied. Yes. Why? Because you had already discovered the false employment records. I stared at her. I had not remembered that. Then a piece returned. A safety auditor had called our office 2 days before the accident asking why my certification number appeared on payroll in Oregon. I assumed it was clerical. Martin overheard. He knew the cannery lie was about to surface. If the company learned he was moonlighting under your name, Gail said, They would fire him and possibly report both of you to the licensing board. Both of us. Your credentials had been used. Martin thought they would not believe you were uninvolved. So he blamed me for the accident to protect me from the identity fraud? Gail shook her head. No, he blamed you because he was angry. That was the first major twist. Martin had not falsely accused me as part of a noble plan. He blamed me because, in the first minutes after losing his hand, he needed the accident to belong to someone else. The honesty of that hurt more than a heroic explanation would have. Gail said Martin changed his story twice in the hospital. First, he told the foreman the cutting order was mine. Then he told Gail it was his own mistake. When company investigators arrived, he returned to blaming me. Why? I asked. He had pain medication in him. He was afraid. He believed his life was over. That does not explain 30 years of silence. No, Gail said. Pride explains some. Shame explains the rest. She said Martin intended to correct the record once he recovered. Then the Cannery contacted him about unpaid taxes under my name. He panicked. If he admitted the truth, the company might reopen everything. So he let the accusation stand. And you left him, I said. Gail looked down. I left because living with him became impossible, but not only because of the injury. She had also learned how deeply Martin had involved himself in Dennis's debt without telling her. He paid money, threatened Dennis, borrowed against their house, and worked himself nearly to death. I asked him to help, she said. Then I hated the way he helped. That was understandable. Martin had turned sacrifice into control. Gail had turned desperation into permission. Dennis had turned shame into another promise he did not keep. No villains. No one clean. I asked where Martin was. Gail looked surprised. You do not know. Know what? He is alive. For years, I had assumed he died. Someone told me he moved to Alaska. Later, somebody else said cancer. I never checked because checking might have required me to care. Gail said Martin lived in Walla Walla, in an assisted living apartment. He has Parkinson's, she said. Some days are good. Does he know about the thermos? He asked Ruth to keep it. Why? Because it was the last thing he owned that still had your fingerprints on it. I almost did not go. That is another truth I am not proud of. For 3 weeks, the red thermos sat on my kitchen counter. I passed it every morning. Sometimes it looked like evidence, sometimes like bait. Then my daughter, Claire, came over and found me polishing the dented lid with a dish towel. What is that? She asked. I told her. Not every detail. Enough. She listened, then said, Are you waiting for him to deserve a visit? I am waiting until I know what I want to say. You may know after you say the wrong thing first. That sounded like Linda. So I drove to Walla Walla. Martin sat in a common room near a window, wearing a faded work jacket with one sleeve pinned back slightly where his damaged hand curled inward. He recognized me before the nurse said my name. Mercer. Shaw. His voice was softer, but still carried the old dry edge. I placed the thermos on the table between us. He looked at it for a long time. Ruth kept everything, he said. Not everything. No. His right hand trembled against his knee. I asked a question I had rehearsed all the way there. Why did you never tell me? Martin smiled without humor. Which part? All of it. He looked out the window. Because every year made the truth uglier. He admitted using my certification, admitted working exhausted, admitted choosing the cutting sequence, admitted blaming me. Then he said, You still said yes. I felt the old anger rise. I said yes because you told me the plate was secure, and because you wanted the job finished. He was right. I could have stopped the dive. I could have insisted on the safer method. Instead, I let friendship become a substitute for judgment. I was wrong. I said, So was I. It was the first agreement we'd shared in nearly 3 decades. Martin asked if I knew what happened to Dennis. I said no. He paid me back, Martin said. That surprised me. When? Over 20 years. Dennis never produced one large repayment. He sent small checks. $50. Sometimes 20. Missed months. Started again. He worked deck jobs, then maintenance at a fish plant. What did you do with the money? I asked. Martin looked at the thermos. Sent it to you. I never received anything. Not directly. After the accident, my diving license was suspended during the investigation. I lost 6 months of work. Linda took a temporary bookkeeping job at a medical office. We managed, but barely. Then, without explanation, several older clients began offering me inspection work above water, equipment reviews, safety training, jobs that kept income coming until my license was restored. I always believed my reputation had saved me. Martin said he had called those clients. He told them the accident was complicated, he said. Told them you were still the best man they knew around underwater steel, while publicly blaming me. Yes. Why? Because guilt makes people inconsistent. That was the second twist. Martin had allowed the official blame to remain on me, yet privately used Dennis's repayments and his own contacts to keep my family afloat. He protected my livelihood while damaging my name. The kindness did not cancel the betrayal. The betrayal did not erase the kindness. What was the thermos for? I asked. Martin rubbed the dent with one finger. I carried on the Cannery shifts. Reminded me of our real work. Then after the accident, I could not stand looking at it. So you left it. I left everything that made me remember who I was before. His eyes filled, though he did not cry. I thought if I gave it back, you would come looking for an apology I did not know how to make. I might have. I know. We sat in silence. Then Martin said, the coffee was always terrible after you stopped making it. That was not an apology. It was close enough to open the door. I visited Martin every month for the next 2 years. Not because we restored what we had. We did not. Some days we talk about old dives. Some days he was angry that I still questioned the cutting sequence. Some days I was angry that he remembered my failures more clearly than his own. Forgiveness did not arrive as one clean decision. It came in ordinary pieces. A ride to a medical appointment. A sandwich split at noon. Martin admitting he had envied how easily I returned to work. Me admitting I had enjoyed being the injured party, because it gave me a reason never to ask whether I had been careless too. Gail visited once while I was there. The three of us sat around the little table with the red thermos between us. She told Martin she had forgiven him years earlier and still did not trust the man he had been. He said, that seems fair. Dennis came later. He was 70 by then, thin and stooped. He apologized to each of us without asking what the apology purchased. Martin told him, you paid the money. Dennis said, not the years. No one argued. When Martin died, there was no large gathering. Gail, Dennis, Claire, and I stood together at a small service in Walla Walla. The thermos sat beside Martin's photograph because he had asked for it there. Afterward, Gail offered it to me. I almost refused. Then I took it home. It sits on the shelf above my old diving helmet. I do not use it for coffee. The inside smells faintly of metal and whatever people once believed they could carry without spilling. The dent in the lid catches the light. At first, it meant Martin's lie. Then it meant the hidden work he did for Gail and Dennis. Later, it became the thing he could not return because returning it required him to return as the whole man he had been. Now it means something simpler. Two friends can fail each other badly and still have mattered. The thermos is not repaired. It still closes if you turn the lid slowly.